So good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for being here. So the last few weeks, things these themes for classes have kind of fit together in certain ways. First, we talked about karma, seeds, and fruits. And then last week, we talked about four kinds of seeds that we could intentionally plant. And this week, I want to talk a little bit about samskara. This might be a word that you've heard before. It's often translated as latent impressions, and that's one way. It's a little abstract. Samskaras in many ways are the repeated patterns in our lives that sort of form our natural response to things, or what we think is our natural response to things. So this could be that the whole idea of conditioning, like, well, we touched a toaster a long time ago and it was hot and we burned our fingers, and so the impression that was left in our mind is that shiny things are hot, or that toasters shouldn't be touched, or whatever. So we have sort of these experiences that then make a deep impression on our psyche and the way that we interact with the world. And we often then act from these samskaras. A couple weeks ago, when we were talking about perception, we asked the question, how much of what I'm experiencing in this moment is from memory, and how much of it is created new in this moment? And I think that is a real key point for what we're talking about today. So just like there's no good and bad karma, there's no such thing as like a good or a bad samskara. There are habits and patterns in the mind that lead to oneness, and there are patterns and habits in our mind and in our lives that lead away from oneness. So if you need to decide which is which, we might call one of those good and one of those bad. But the truth is that it's just anything that is repeated often becomes a deeper and deeper and deeper impression on our mind. So if every time we eat asparagus we get really sick, eventually we learn that those two things, the cause and effect, are connected, and we maybe choose to stop eating asparagus or kind of figure out what's going on with our bodies or whatever. So we have these patterns, and what I would like for us to maybe think about as we practice today, and this could be a strange class, we'll see how it goes, but what I'm kind of hoping to do is to intentionally kind of break through these patterns a little bit, not because patterns are inherently bad, or that we need to judge and assess our patterns on terms of good or bad, or helpful or not helpful, so much as if we step outside of the pattern and can observe it, then we are able to decide whether it is a pattern we want to continue to cultivate, or a pattern that we'd like to maybe let go of or replace with something else, or improve or adjust or change in some way. So we're going to do a little bit of intentional disruption today, but also thinking about how when we are doing anything that we do frequently, we are contributing in some way to a deeper and deeper impression of that action, that seed, and that seed, of course, then, as we know, will create some kind of fruit. So it could be something small, like the way you brush your teeth. This is one of my favorite examples because we don't even realize that we brush our teeth like the same exact way every single time. So as you go to bed tonight, or when you wake up tomorrow, the next time you brush your teeth, I invite you to either switch to your non-dominant hand, or choose, as soon as you stick the toothbrush in your mouth, find a different place to put it. See if you can kind of break up that pattern just so that you can notice what it is. Same thing with maybe trying to write with your non-dominant hand, or do something that you do frequently with your non-dominant hand, just to kind of step outside of the pattern just enough to bring awareness to it. So I think what we're going to do is think about these actions as seeds, and how these seeds, the more deeply we plant the seeds, the deeper the roots will be as that thing grows into fruition. And so we want to ask ourselves, does the seed that I'm planting with this action, or does the seed that I'm planting with this thought or feeling that I'm engaging with, does it contribute to wholeness, contentedness, stillness within, true identity? Or does this seed, however deeply planted, contribute to habitual suffering, habitual questioning, habitual uncertainty, things like that? So again, we're not judging these things as good or bad, we're just being intentional about the patterns that we engage with. And I want to kind of pit that samskara thing against awareness, again, kind of reiterating that question, how much of this experience that I'm having in this moment is created from memory and how much is created new in this moment? Imagine walking through a familiar room in your house in the middle of the night with all the lights off. You know where the furniture is, not because you can see it, but because you just have this stored spatial memory of a familiar space. In the same way, I'd like for us to notice where in life we're sort of moving through a dark space, just kind of relying on our memory of the experience. And how often are we like flipping on the lights and really surveying the scene and living from that place of presence? So what we're going to do is find our comfortable seat. This is something that we're going to do that like we always do. We typically begin in this shape. So coming into that comfortable seat. And first, kind of seeing if we can just bring a sense of awareness to this familiar pose. We often start class in this shape. See if you can bring a full presence to noticing how you feel today. If you just briefly, before you get too settled in, look down at your feet, switch your legs, put the other leg on top. Somehow find a way to disrupt the regular pattern of it so we can bring more awareness to sensation. And then I'm going to ask you to be awkward throughout this entire class, so just kind of be prepared for that. As you kind of find that settling in the low body, just start to move the upper body. And I'm intentionally not giving you many instructions. I don't remember where I saw this. It was a movie or something where somebody was trying to come up with a completely unique movement. That there was nobody who'd ever done this exact series of poses or movements before. And so just kind of opening up and disrupting the channels, maybe shaking or twisting or finding some dynamic flowing, maybe the hands and feet get involved a little bit. And just move the spine in lots of different directions, move the shoulders around, turn the head, move the arms, no particular pattern, no particular noticing of where the breath is, but just move. Then after you've kind of been aware of how your body's been moving, come into that settled stillness. Come back to that familiar tall spine, the deep seatedness of the sitting bones into the floor, the lifting of the heart, the reaching upward of the crown of the head, the softening of the shoulders, just coming into stillness. Notice how the movement brought some aliveness and awareness to different parts of the body. And then we're going to again find some familiar shapes and then kind of disrupt them. So when we typically cat-cow in a class, we inhale to open and lift the heart. The chin rises, the shoulders pull back, and as we exhale, the shoulders come forward, chin to chest, back of the heart opens. This is our familiar way of doing this. And just flow through several rounds of this familiar cat-cow with your breath. Then next time you inhale, pause in your shape for a minute. Let a few breath cycles pass. Just kind of holding steady. Then exhale in this shape, and as you inhale, reverse to chin to chest, cat back. And pause here for a moment. Feel your breath flowing in each direction as you bring awareness to your heart. And then let's reverse our cat-cow, kind of doing the opposite of what we normally do. So take another big inhale here in cat, and as you exhale, find cow with the heart forward and chin lifted. So we're breathing in as we find cat, breathing out as we come into cow. Notice if it's a little more challenging to stay with the pattern. It's a little reverse of what we normally find. Then relax back into that natural state of being again, that tall spine, the deep-seated sitting bones. Find that inner stillness, the part of you that is unaffected by anything exterior. And let's find another familiar motion. So hands coming down beside us on the mat. As we inhale, kind of sweep out open wide. And as we exhale, bring the hands back down. So maybe the hands are briefly touching the floor and then maybe touching one another as they come up above the head. Inhaling to rise through the fingers, exhaling to touch back down. This is again another familiar flow or pairing in yoga. And just to kind of disrupt, see how easy it is. We almost don't even have to really think about it. It feels very natural. Next time your hands come up above your head, pause. And then as you inhale next, bring your hands down. As you exhale, bring them back up. Notice if this simple act is really challenging for you simply because it's not the way we habitually do it. Two more. Then allow your hands to come back into your lap again. Just sit for a moment in that familiar stillness. Just noticing how that might have been challenging for the mind, even though it wasn't any more difficult in action than our first one. Because it was less familiar, we had to stay really aware not to accidentally slip back into the more familiar pattern. And this is the challenge of what it is to change. We first need to find awareness of ourselves, which is why we have this stillness as a reference point. And then we have our ability to step outside of the pattern and notice which ones we want to cultivate, which ones we might want to reverse. And then it requires some effort to reverse our normal way of doing things. So just kind of noticing that. We're going to come into a reverse table shape. So this looks like bringing the legs out in front of your body, soles of the feet on the floor, hands are coming behind you. Fingers typically pointing away from the body here, so opposite direction of your toes. And once you have kind of a steadiness here, we're just going to kind of lift and lower the body. So it doesn't necessarily have to be with an inhale or an exhale, but just kind of finding a lift where the pelvis rises away from the floor, and then a lower where it touches back down. You can pair this with your breath if you like. The next time you come up from the floor, just kind of pause. See if you can kind of retain the alignment of your head with your heart and your pelvis. If that's not comfortable, bring chin to chest. And then see if in this shape, we can kind of gently kind of cat and cow. So this might be shifting through the hips. We might also bring the head and neck into it. Notice the challenge of how we normally are in a regular tabletop, how much easier this is. It requires some awareness and thinking to kind of reverse the direction of the spine. Let your sitting bones come back down. Take a rest from your wrists and just kind of find again some free-flowing movement. And then maybe just pausing in a little bit of a stillness here for a moment. You can feel free to support yourself with your hands if you like. Just find a little stillness. So we're going to try something else that is pretty challenging. So be gentle with yourself as you decide how long to hold these shapes and how to experiment with this. But we're going to come back into that reverse table shape. And you don't have to be totally level, just as long as you're off the floor and you're kind of pressing into the hands and the feet. See if you can maintain some kind of an alignment of the spine. And what we're going to experiment with is lifting each limb off the mat one at a time. So maybe one foot will come up off the floor. It can be high or low. Then get steady again. Lift another limb, whether it's a foot or a hand, an arm, or leg. Touch back down. Find a third limb to lift. Touch back down. And find a limb, whatever it is, lift it up off the floor. And all your limbs back to the floor, let your sitting bones come down. And again, just kind of shake off the challenge of that shape. Now, if we were on our hands and knees facing forward, that would have been a lot easier of an exercise. So again, just noticing how when we do something out of the ordinary, when we break a pattern in some way that's familiar to us, we by necessity bring ourselves into presence and awareness, especially if that new novel thing that we're doing is challenging in some way. So just kind of notice that relationship and how that might fit into some of the patterns of your life. So now we're going to come in, legs back and behind you. And just briefly here, take a little cat-cow. How much, there's almost no thinking involved in this. How much easier and mindless this could be than when we were in that reversed table shape. We'll come back to neutral here. And again, let's take this just briefly exercise. Lift one limb off the floor. You got it, right? You're struggling with balance necessarily. Try the limb, switching. All fours, lift another limb. Come back to all fours and that fourth limb, lift it off the mat for a moment and come back. So again, because we've done this many times, we're on autopilot. When we do it from a new angle or a different way, a different perspective, we find that there is so much more awareness and presence involved. Over here, we're going to take some side bending motions and we're going to try to see, this is a pretty weird flow. Like I said, we're going to try to break up some patterns. So walk both of your hands over to the right side of the mat for a moment. Feel spaciousness between the lower and the left hip and kind of a squeezing or an active pressure from right hip and right shoulder together. Then from here, keep your right hand planted. Start to lift your left hand off the mat. Just kind of make some sweeping motions here with the shoulder. Kind of open up like a camel kind of shape. So we started out, let's start at the beginning of that. Let's just come back to hands and knees. So again, familiar shape. And we're going to walk both hands over to the right side of the mat. So we're kind of in that side bending shape. Kind of pull the left shoulder away from the left hip and kind of squeeze the right shoulder toward the right hip. And then here's where it gets a little more unfamiliar. So kind of pressing into the right hand, start to take some of the weight out of the left and let your left hand come off the floor. Now you can make some sweeping motions here if you like. You can just raise, you can just kind of lift off the floor. But just kind of notice that there's a lot of awareness going on, of sensation in the body as your your left arm moves. Then from here, we're going to hinge up to standing on the knees. So body is upright. Hands can come up and lift to open the heart. We could also maybe choose hands on hips or fists into the low back. We could also maybe choose to reach toward the ankles. This is a camel-like shape. So that big open heart. Then from here, come back to neutral spine. Let your left hand come down next to you on the mat. Kind of move your right arm up and around. So we're kind of in that flowing side bending shape. Then bring your right hand down to the floor. Kind of squeeze left shoulder and left hip. Open right shoulder away from the right hip. Notice the sensations. Then walk back to center. And we're just going to sort of tuck the tailbone under, kind of cat back, and then leave your hands where they are as your hips lower towards your heels. They don't have to touch down, but if that's comfortable, you can. And just take a few breaths here. On an inhale, rise back up to all fours, tabletop, and then walk hands to the left side of your mat. Left hip squeezes toward the left shoulder. Right shoulder and hip open away from one another. Get nice and steady on that left hand and experiment with lifting the right off the floor. It can find some motion. It can just hover. But notice if you're moving where the sensations change in the shape. Again, we're going to rise up from here to standing on the knees. Arms might also rise or they might support you so we can come into that camel-like shape. Feel free to take this pose statically or again, just find a little bit of flowing movement here. Coming coming back to that neutral spine. Right hand's gonna come down beside us on the mat. Left arm might find some motion or movement here. Notice how this changes the stretch and sensation in the body. Then left hand will come down to meet the right on the right side of the mat. We're squeezing right sides together and broadening the left sides. Then walk again back to all fours, our more typical and familiar pose. Find a nice big open cat back as chin comes to chest. And then sink hips back toward heels, find child's pose. Maybe, even though there's not a lot of mobility in child's pose, maybe we can just kind of wiggle or start to find a little tiny bit of motion within child's pose, noticing how that shifts the sensation, how it brings awareness to a pose that is otherwise familiar and not very effortful. Excellent. Then rising back up into our normal tabletop shape. Tuck the toes, and then nice and slow, kind of lifting and lowering the knees. Start to work a little bit higher each time you come up to stretch out the backs of the legs. So normally we might do this by bending one knee and then the other. We're just kind of taking a slightly different approach to come into that same stretch in the backs of the legs. When you feel ready, pause in your down dog. Hips might shift a little side to side. We might adjust the pose just a little bit. This, again, another familiar shape. How can we kind of find some awareness and aliveness here? How can we bring a little bit of novelty to pay attention to in this familiar shape? So again, we're going to try something that might work out. It might not work out. It's okay to fall out and laugh. I did as I was practicing this earlier. So we're going to come into a 3-limb downward facing dog. The right foot's going to come off the floor, maybe a little, maybe a lot. And what we're going to try to do here is bend into the left knee so that the left knee comes back down to the mat, but the right leg stays lifted. Then from here, we can maybe roll open. We can maybe just be on all fours and just find some motion in that hip. We might bring the right foot down to the floor and steady ourselves to come into a side plank kind of shape. So just find some novel ways to move your body. And then we're going to see if, and again, it's okay if it doesn't work out. Tuck without bringing your right knee back down. Tuck the left toes and see if you can come back up into 3-limb downward facing dog. Big challenge. And then come back to all fours in down dog. Drop your knees down for a moment. Take a little cat arch and child's pose. As you pause in your stillness, notice where there's sensation in the body. That was kind of a novel set of poses or set of movements. Notice if it's the shoulders, it's the hips, it's the wrists. Just kind of notice and acknowledge kind of that novelty or how that brings awareness to you. Let's rise again into tabletop. Let's come back into downward facing dog. Feel free to take a few breaths just to kind of settle into it, bringing novelty and awareness to something familiar. And then we're going to try to find this other side. So left leg's going to lift, 3-limb downward facing dog. Maybe it's high, maybe it's low, maybe it's moving. And again, with a lot of awareness, we're going to see if we can challenge ourselves to keep that left leg lifted off the mat as we bring the right knee back down to the mat. And then once we're down on 3 limbs here, either finding movement or some novel ways of feeling the body. Then challenging ourselves to see if we can stay lifted with that left leg as we come back into 3-limb downward facing dog. Then 4 limbs on the mat. Nice big inhale in down dog, and as you exhale, knees drop. Inhale into the back body, cat arch. Exhale, child's pose. And again, in this stillness place, in child's pose, as we kind of catch our breath and release ourselves to gravity, kind of feel where sensation was novel here. Notice the awkwardness of these poses and these movements because they're not familiar to us. They require, we almost have to be creative. We have to create the pose in the moment rather than relying on our memory of, somebody just calling out a pose and our body finding that shape. So that's kind of the intention behind this. Rising back up again, we're going to take a little bit of motion here. This is going to be the hardest work that we do. However, we're going to try to do it with awareness, and it should be rather familiar to us. So we're going to come back into down dog. And we're going to flow through several rounds of just basic vinyasa. Again, these poses are all familiar, but see if you can kind of bring a sense of awareness. Imagine that we don't know the names of these poses. So I'm going to try not to name them. We're going to shift weight so that the hips come more level to the floor and find a flat back. Knees can be on or off the mat, but long spine, pressing arms straight. Hold, but let your breath flow. Then start to relax your body, bending at the knees and the elbows to come all the way down so that the belly is resting on the mat. Chin is resting. Once here, pull the shoulders and the elbows in towards the spine and up and away from the floor. Then begin to lift the heart away from the floor. Lift through the chin, pull the shoulders back. We can press into the hands here or the forearms. Take a few breaths, feel the shape. Exhale, come back to the belly. Tuck your toes, come first knees and hands on the floor, that all four shape, and then lift the knees back to downward facing dog. So these are the poses that we're going to take. So exhale, we've got a flat back, arms are pressing into the floor. Notice where your knees are, notice where your toes are, notice how long your spine can be. On an exhale, come all the way to the belly flat on the mat. Open the heart towards the floor. And then lift the heart, open the heart towards the wall in front of you or the ceiling. Where is there sensation? Exhale, soften. All fours as we rise. Toes tuck and downward facing dog. So now that we kind of know the action, I'd love for you to move with your own breath, kind of unguided so that you have to stay really aware. So just kind of flowing through this typical vinyasa, maybe bringing it into a different way of doing things. Just kind of notice how much of your flowing movement is from memory and how much is a conscious choice in this moment. Feel free to improvise or add little flourishes to this flow. Find a way to make it fresh. Take one more round of your flowing movements, complete, and then find your way back to that downward facing dog where everybody will meet. Once we're back in downward facing dog, take another breath, kind of lift through the sacrum, press into the floor with the feet and hands, and then step both feet to the top of the mat. We're going to find a forward fold here. Strong through the feet, strong through the legs, soft through the backs of the knees, soft at the back of the neck, soft in the shoulders. Kind of shake out any tension, sort of disrupt the stagnancy of energy. This is about accepting that we are allowed to change our minds. We are allowed to change our hearts. That change is always available to us if we choose to employ the freedom of choice. We can do things the way we've always done it, or we can try something new or bring a fresh attitude to something we typically are doing mindlessly. On an inhale, find a half flat back. Become alert through the spine. Alert through the legs. Maybe hands come out like an airplane, maybe they're supporting us, maybe they reach forward. So find some experimentation with the arms. Everything aware, everything alert. Exhale, find that deep fold again. Letting go, kind of shaking out, disrupting stillness, just kind of allowing it to be flowy. On an inhale, flat back again. Again, arms can be anywhere, but be alert through all the parts of the body. Maybe the arms are even in motion here. On an exhale, relax back into your fold. Inhale, find that flat back one more time. Arms can be anywhere that feels good to you. And last time, let's exhale back into that fold. Bending at the knees if needed so that the hands can plant at the top of the mat. And let's again step back into downward facing dog. So from here, we're going to find that three-limbed downward facing dog shape again. So right foot is going to lift, high or low, movement or stillness. And then that right foot is going to step forward between the hands to find a lunge. Back knee can stay lifted or it can lower down. Make your own choice. And then start to just rock the body forward and back. The spine might move with this, but just leaving your right foot on the floor. Just kind of shift your hips side to side, forward and back. Just find some novelty within this familiar lunge pose. Then sinking forward into bringing some more weight into that right foot, staying low in your lunge. Again, back knee can be lifted or lowered. We're going to lift the heart and chest away from the mat, away from the thigh. Arms might rise. They might be on hips. They might be on the floor or on the thigh. Just find a few breaths. Again, familiar shape. Then relax, hands back to the floor if they're not already, chin to chest, kind of leaning over that right leg. We're going to kind of pull the right knee and the right hip backwards toward the back of the mat. Maybe there's some movement here. We're humbled before this unfamiliar movement. Then both hands are going to start to swing inside of that right leg, finding Skandasana. Left leg reaches to one side of the mat as we lean towards the right foot, right hip. Maybe hands are on the floor, maybe hands lift. Maybe we're high up off the floor, maybe we're low, maybe we're in motion. Turning back towards the right foot again. Back knee can drop or stay lifted, your choice. And we're going to start to twist the body, so balancing on that left hand, open to the right. And this could look like right hand on thigh. This could look like motion. This could look like shifting forward and back in this shape with heart facing the right side of the mat. Find some new ways of feeling sensation within something familiar. Untwist, bring both hands to frame the right toes again, and tuck the left toes under the body, step back, find downward facing dog. Just 3 breaths here to kind of find some stability. Then left leg will lift, just like we did on the right. Kind of find motion or stillness, high or low lift in that leg. And eventually that left foot's going to step between the hands again, finding a lunge shape. Back knee can stay lifted or dropped, your choice. And just find some of that rocking motion. Start to move the hips, maybe twisting a little bit. Noticing what range of motion is available. Maybe spine comes forward and back. Then again, with back knee lifted or lowered, we're going to start to find that heart forward shape. So pressing into the floor, the thigh, reaching up, interlacing fingers or supporting the sacrum. Lift and open your heart. Another few breaths. Find some stability. See if you can stay really alert and aware. Again, a familiar shape. On an exhale, come back to framing your left toes. Start to walk back just a little bit, kind of pulling that left hip and knee back towards the back of the mat, finding some motion here. And humbling ourselves over that left thigh. So chin to chest, kind of big cat arch in the spine. Then shifting both hands to the inside of the left foot, we're going to find that skandasana shape again. So right leg is long and extended. Hands might be supporting us or lifting and reaching. Lots of different choices we could make here to keep this pose really fresh. Maybe we're lifting and lowering. Then come back to framing the left toes. This time the right knee can drop if you like. You can also keep it lifted if you want to experiment. Balancing on that right hand, opening your heart to the left side, which could look like left hand on thigh or reaching up. There could be motion, there could be stillness. See what you can do, what different kinds of movements you can make with your heart shifted to that left side. And eventually untwisting again, coming back to frame the left toes. Back toes are going to tuck under the body, and let's again step back again to downward facing dog. Take about 3 breaths here. On an exhale, let your knees come back down, all fours in that tabletop shape. Take a nice big cat arch as you inhale, and then exhale, find child's pose again. Take this moment of pause to just be aware of the body, aware of how we normally take some of these shapes, and aware of how much creativity is involved when we're creating them new in the moment. We will rise back up into our tabletop shape again, and we're going to switch it out back to that reverse table. So swing your knees out to one side, bring your sitting bones to the floor, shift your feet back in front of you, hands behind the body, and we're just going to take a couple more of those kind of lift and lower. So your hips might be coming just a little off the floor, or we might be coming more perpendicular to the floor. Any range in between those two works, but just kind of lifting and lowering. Next time your hips come back down to the floor, take a pause. Again, maybe the hands lift to kind of shake out the wrists. We find a little bit of flowing motion, some cat and cow, twisting perhaps. Then coming back to leaning gently into the hands. We're going to take a deer twist. So again, this is something you might want to use props for. We can also just stay on the hands. But start to send the knees from side to side. Don't decide which side you're going to start your deer twist with. Just kind of notice the movement, the fluidity, the uncertainty of not having made a decision. And then when I give a signal, whichever side you're on, take your deer twist on that side. So keep moving side to side at whatever speed feels good to you. And now, whatever side you're on, find your deer twist on that side. Lots of options again here. We can be static on the hands. We could come down to forearms. We could be using a prop to support. We might find stillness here. We might find a little bit of like flowing motion in this shape. Find some way to make it fresh for yourself, where there are novel sensations that your mind is paying attention to. Bring a deep sense of awareness into the habitual pattern of this twisting pose. Take about 3 to 5 more breaths, either in stillness or in flow. And start to walk your way back out of the twist, back into that prep for reverse table. So hands behind the body, soles of the feet on the floor. Take a few of those lift and lowers. The next time your hips come back down to the floor, again, just allow your knees to fall to that opposite side. Walking yourself into the twist, again, making lots of choices about whether to remain static or in motion, whether to raise up on the palms or the fingertips, or whether to lower down onto a support or the forearms or the belly. Notice your breath shifting. See what you can do to break up the pattern of this shape. Bringing novelty, bringing a deep sense of awareness to something familiar. This awareness is not only a deep description of our natural state, that we are pure consciousness, that we are pure awareness, but it also brings us into that practice of almost a devotional level of awareness brought to everything we do. When you're ready, start to find your way untwisting from your shape, coming back to soles of the feet and palms on the mat. And from here, we can find a little bit of maybe micro cat-cow with hips either on the floor. Feel free to lift them if you like. And then we're going to come all the way to the spine on the floor. So just kind of rolling the body back down to the mat, back of the head, shoulders and sacrum all supported here. Soles of the feet can remain on the floor. And we're going to do kind of an extreme cat-cow from this position. So first, with everything on the floor, start to point the tailbone up. Feel the top of the sacrum and the bottom of the ribs kind of pressing into the mat in this shape. Then perhaps the feet want to come up off the floor and the knees come in towards the chest, kind of lifting a little bit more of the sacrum. Now the back of the ribs is deep into the mat. Maybe the head also lifts off the mat, nose coming towards the knees a little bit. And this extending the back of the neck and lifting the top of the ribs away from the floor. Then relax yourself back down, whole body coming flat and neutral, soles of the feet on the floor. Point the tailbone down, feel the top of the ribs and the bottom of the sacrum in contact with the floor. Maybe there's a little arch behind the middle of the back. And from this place, press into the mat and keeping the tailbone pointed down, start to lift your sacrum or your hips up toward the ceiling. Maybe it's just a little bit of a lift, maybe it's a lot. Keep it novel. Notice this tailbone kind of pointing down, what this does to the openness of the front body. Good. Slowly, keeping the tailbone pointed down, lower back down to the mat. Tailbone is pointing down, shoulders and bottom of the sacrum are on the floor, perhaps the mid-back is lifting. And again, from this shape, kind of doing the opposite of what we would normally do, lift your feet up off the floor. Maybe the knees try to come in towards the chest, but they're not as because the tailbone is pointed down, maybe they can't come as close. Maybe the knees have to be a little wider for this to be comfortable. So just kind of notice, maybe shift a little bit, explore this strange position. Then relax your feet back down, release that arch in the spine, let your whole body come flat, or your whole spine rather come flat from sacrum to shoulders to back of the head. resting in the floor. Start to move into that tailbone pointing up position that we did before. So tailbone is reaching up, top of the sacrum, bottom of the ribs are pressed into the mat. And from this place, press into the feet and start to lift your hips again. Notice how different this feels. It's almost like the belly is dropped a little bit here. Rather than the heart lifting toward the chin, it's just kind of still maybe flat on the floor. Just take a couple more breaths in this sort of strange position. Notice which muscles are more engaged here, what sensations are new or different. And again, on an exhale, start to bring your body back down to neutral. Take about 5 breaths or so just to kind of feel around the body. What is your body calling for? What sensations might need attending to? And from wherever you are, taking your motions, just kind of preparing the body for stillness, taking care of any last strong sensations, find your way into a resting shape. Feel free to take a little bit different resting shape than you normally do. Perhaps Shavasana is the right answer for you today, but feel free to experiment, possibly with an upright seat or legs up the wall, or a different set of props than you normally use for rest. See if as you come into deeper stillness, letting go of tension and effort in the body, if you can allow your only effort here to be unhindered awareness. Notice the body. Notice any external sounds or sensations in your home. Just be fully present with this moment. We know what resting pose is. We do this a lot. All of us are regular practitioners. What sense of deep awareness can you bring to this familiar and relaxed shape that keeps you aware even as your body and your mind are resting? Can we become liberated from our identity, liberated from our sensation, and become that full awareness, that full present awareness? very structure of our lives depends on these patterns. In your stillness, feel your breath flowing in and out, the consistency and regularity of this pattern in the body, this series of actions in the body, completely automated, no thought required. Feel the beating of your heart. Imagine the familiar pathways of your vascular system through which this blood is recirculated again and again and again through these habitual patterns of the body that are so regular that it does not require our attention to work. Our lives depend on this automation. Our lives depend on these habitual patterns of movements in the body and the tissues. But not everything should be this automatic. We do have the ability to bring awareness to our breath, and by so doing, also change some other automatic responses in the body. Maybe place a hand over your heart, just continue that soft breath. Then begin to bring intention and awareness and engagement with your breath by deepening your breath. Notice what happens to your heart rate. Long, slow breaths in, long, slow breaths out. Feel how this changes your heart. Then begin to wake the body up a little bit more. Create a little bit of excitement by taking some sort of fast and shallow breaths. Feel how this changes, again, the rate of your heart, resets the pattern of some of the automatic places in our body system. Then relax your breath again. Allow it to return to its natural state. And through whatever series of motions and steps feels right to you, maybe stretching and coiling, maybe rolling around a little bit, or just finding a little bit of movement, make your way slowly over the next minute or so to your upright seat. And again, just notice which leg lands on top as you come into that seat. What habitual patterns are supportive of our goals? What things are okay to be on autopilot, and yet what things could we maybe bring awareness to? That as we bring awareness to that one, or engagement to that one particular pattern in our lives, how might it affect several of the other patterns that are just on autopilot, naturally, not even with more effort? Come back to your centered place, and again, just kind of be aware of the body. Be aware of the breath. Be aware of any sound or sensation outside the body. Be aware of the thoughts and the mind. And bring this awareness in one hand to the actions and seeds of karma, the actions of samskaras, the patterning, the intentional choices that we make. Bring those things together and just infuse every action, every step that we take with that awareness, that present awareness, and then pull that present awareness into your heart. Maybe the chin gently shifts downward to keep our gaze inward, to acknowledge this constant vigilance, this engagement with the sakshi, that witnessing awareness, and bringing novelty and presence to even our most basic patterns. As we find our way toward oneness, as we engage intentionally toward this goal, we unintentionally even can still uplift others just through the very individual actions that we take. And this way our practice is a service to ourselves and all others as one. Aloka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May all beings be happy, healthy, safe, and free. Namaste.